Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to review the landscapes assessment and look at what you should have written and the kind of model answers that we'd be looking for you to produce if these were questions you were really asked. And please pay attention to some of the advice you're given about how to answer some of these questions. Okay, so in question one, it was a very typical National 5 exam question where you are given an Ordnance Survey map and you're asked to identify a range of features. You were given the 3 grid references that you can see here. And you were also given 4 options to choose from, including the cliff, the stack, the sand spit, and the arch. Now, because there are 4 options here and only 3 grid points, one of them has to be inaccurate. Well, 827694 would have taken you to this grid square, and it would have actually taken you to the point right there, which I'm indicating on the map. And right next to that, that actually tells us natural arch. So that is a feature. It looks like a tiny little headland, actually. But because we obviously are above it, because a map is an aerial view, we can't actually see the arch on a map, which is why they've told us what it is. So that one was quite easy, and that one was 827694. 812681, if you got your precise map reading, would have taken you to this small little rock just off the coast, right there above the top arrow. Okay, and a rock lying off the coast, just like this one down here, that would be a stack. So if you'd written stack for that, that is what you would have got. Finally, 843662 would have taken you to this location. Okay, and you can see it's against the coast. There's this little symbol right here, which indicates it's a cliff line. So that one was a cliff. Now, incidentally, that leaves you with one feature that you aren't asked to identify, the sand spit. It wasn't on that particular part of the map at all. But just to show you what a sand spit would look like, here is a map of another location in Scotland where we can see a beach forming, and then the beach is continuing to grow out across the mouth of this river here, which is what happens when a spit forms. And we can see the sand dune actually started to grow out across, but it can't get to the other side because of the current of the water flowing here. We can actually see here that the line has been marked to show us the kind of the hook shape of the actual spit. During a high tide, this beach area would be covered, but this bit wouldn't be. So we have a spit here. That's what a spit kind of would look like. It would be a colored beach with a kind of hook shape extending out from the coast. Okay, let's now move on to your second question, which is also very typical of National 5 exams. As soon as you've been asked the map question, you're then asked to explain the formation of a feature. Now, in this case, it was a coastal feature, and weren't given a choice in this question. You had to do the spit. So there's 2 ways you could have answered that. The first one would be drawing a diagram, like we can see here, or the second one would have been writing an answer. Okay, now everything that's in the answer, the written answer here is the same as is in the diagram, but let's just have a look at the written answer so I can show you where the marks are awarded. So a sand spit is formed when longshore drift, so a mark there because you've identified a process, takes place when waves move up the coast at an angle due to the primary wind direction depositing sand. So there's another mark. But with the backwash, the wave retreats and comes directly down the beach due to gravity. Well, that is a really amazing extended piece of explanation on longshore drift. So I'm going to give a 3rd mark there. The spit is formed when longshore drift continues to take place when there is a sudden change in the direction of the coastline when it reaches the mouth of a river. So the change in direction of the coast is the key thing. The beach continues to build out into the river because the wave deposits sand but never manages to reach the other side due to the flowing current of the river washing it away. So there's another mark. So now that the beach is built out into the mouth of the river, it gets its hook shape at the end of the spit by secondary winds, blowing the sand in a different direction, creating the hook. And the sheltered piece behind it where a marsh often builds up. Okay, that answer there, or the one above, would not be out of place in a higher geography assessment. So that's an incredibly good bit of answering, and well done to the 2 students that put together those answers. All right, let's continue. Here we've got a very simple question, and this is really a National 4 level question. You wouldn't expect to see this in a National 5 exam. It's just describing the main characteristics of a feature from a diagram. And the student in this case chose a corrie, and they told me it was a bowl-shaped feature, which it is. It has a steep back wall, which it has, and it has a lip at the front. More so, it also has a tarn, which is a small round lake found inside the corrie. So 4 characteristics are identified there. So this student's gone way beyond the 2 marks required. Just like the spit answer up here, where there was only a 4-mark question, but they would have picked up 7 marks. Were 7 marks available? Right, question D. Now this time, unlike question B, which was where you had to do a certain pre-selected coastal feature, this one was a bit kinder. It allows you a choice from a diagram for a feature created by glacial erosion. So kind of the clues in the part of the question here, it's had to have some erosion in it. So if we have a look at the diagram, we can see all of the key points. Now, this was actually one part of a sequence of diagrams. This student had a before the Ice Age and an after as well. And what they could have done by just adding one additional label, they would have had a very, very complete single diagram answer without really needing either of the other two. So if they'd had an arrow pointing to the glacier itself and told me that a glacier forms when snow falls in a hollow and doesn't melt and then builds up in layers, compacting into glacial ice over thousands of years, that kind of label just pointing to this here and written out over here would have been just a perfect single diagram answer. Now, sometimes it's quite handy if you can get all of your points onto one diagram. It saves you time as well in an assessment. Well, let's just have a little look at the written answer. It's a slightly different way of answering this, but it's a really good written answer too. So a corrie is formed when snow falls into hollows on a mountain and does not melt, usually north facing. Now, if the student had actually told me also that that's because north facing slopes are cooler, which is why the ice doesn't melt, it could have been 2 marks for that sentence. The snow compacts into ice, and some of the melted ice acts as a glacier, allowing the ice to rotationally slip. Now, once again, this answer, we're just needing one little extra bit. Snow compacts into ice, forming a glacier. Now, if that sentence had been typed, I would have also given a tick there, which I'm going to put into this answer now. Due to the gravity, the ice starts to move downhill. That's great because that's why it moves and picks up rocks in a process called plucking. That's great. By freezing to the rocks and then pulling them up. I really like this. They've explained what plucking means. Then these rocks then change the landscape further by abrasion. Excellent. A second process. We've got abrasion in our answer. And then finally, the process where the rocks embedded within the glacier scrape against the landscape and smooth it over like landscape sandpaper. So this student has explained what abrasion is. So just like the spit answer, this is also would be considered to be a very, very good higher level answer, not just a National 5, especially with the additional little point there. Okay, so let's move on. That was out 4. Into question 2. Question 2 had 2 parts. You are going to have to deal with some questions to do with glacial landscapes and how they're used and the conflicts and how those conflicts are managed. So you weren't asked about how they're managed, which would have been quite an easy question, especially as you will have done a field trip to Loch Lomond. More than likely by the time you're answering that kind of question. But in this question, we were given a diagram and we were asked to say why that 2 of the land uses in that diagram were suited to a glacial landscape. This question often appears as a map question where you have to give map evidence, and basically you would give these points, but to each point you would just link a grid reference from the map to support your point. So this kind of question can appear in a couple of formats in National 5 exams. So let's have a look at what they wrote. Sheep farming suited the landscape above because the animals are adapted to the harsh conditions. Well, that is true. It's a mountain landscape. Land is cheap because it can be used for little else because it's difficult to build on. This makes it perfect for sheep farming, as sheep can navigate the landscape, which is true. It'd be very difficult for them to build roads or have other fixed structures on this landscape because the land's so steep, but sheep don't mind that. Finally, farmers could not use it for growing crops as the steep slopes would not have suitable soils for this, whereas sheep can eat poor quality grass. Well, that's true. So the soil and the grass is pretty low quality and really only suits sheep. Probably wouldn't even suit cattle. The grass isn't good enough. So what have we got? We've got 3 points for the first land use. So we're beyond our halfway for getting our 5 marks. So what do? This student's gone on to renewable energy, so they've decided they want to talk about that, and they want to say about wind, lots of wind in high top hills with nothing to block the wind. Perfect. I agree. Wind would be suited to this landscape. They've gone a little bit further. They've said that these places are far away from where people live. So that's great. I'm going to give them a mark there. There's going to be no conflict. It shouldn't be too difficult to get permission to build the wind turbines in this landscape. Right. Now they've jumped to a different renewable, which is fine. It doesn't have to just be about wind. They've told me also why hydroelectricity suited, because there's a hanging valley with a huge amount of potential energy because the water's all trapped high above. So I'll give a mark. They've gone a little bit further, saying there's a place for that water to go when it comes down from the hanging valley. There's a ribbon lake in the valley, which there was in the diagram. So another mark. And furthermore, they've said that because there are 3 sides to these valleys with an open front, you only have to build a dam across that small open front, and there's a additional point. So what we can see is a brilliant answer. This is a 5-mark question, but this student has given me a huge amount of points to award, way beyond the 4. Okay, let's just move to our final question. Conflicts. Now, this is a question where a lot of students make mistakes. They start talking about a whole range of different conflicts between different land uses. And this question very specifically says 2 different land uses. So you've got to identify the 2 that you want to have in conflict and then tell me about what that conflict is. Explain the conflict. So this student has very cleverly told me where Loch Lomond and the Trossachs. Why? Because it's in the question. It says, for a named area you have studied. Farming and tourism. So what have they done here? They've now named their 2 land users. So I want to know 4 things about how these 2 are in conflict. So the first one is about gates being left open and sheep escaping. So great, that's a good conflict, a common conflict. What's the conflict? Well, the farmer loses money. We've also got dogs on the loose from walkers walking through their fields, killing sheep. Farmer loses money again. There we go, another conflict. Our third point is about parking over gates. Visitors can't find parking, so they park them over gates. Farmers can't get their vehicles into fields, and they can't work as much, or they just get annoyed. But once again, it is an issue about money, I guess, at the end of the day. And our fourth point is that they might be in conflict because they're narrowing the roads by parking on the sides, and they can't get their farm vehicles up the side. It's very similar to the third point, but a little bit different because it's not about blocking gates. This is more about blocking roads. And then finally, we've got the idea of walkers eroding paths, damaging gates and things like that as they walk across the landscape, and the farmer is responsible for repairing that. So what I like about this answer is it's been nicely structured into firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, fifthly. So the student's been very conscientious in identifying each point as a separate point. They've taken a new paragraph every time they write a new point. So the marker, from a marker's point of view, it's very easy to identify each point the student's making. And they've gone for 5, so they've been on the careful side, maybe because they were wondering if 3 and 4 might be seen as really the same point. So they've got that additional kind of safety point that guarantees they'll get full marks. Okay, so have a look at each of your own answers. And if you haven't been doing it along the way, make sure you go back and just compare them to the feedback, the model answers, and see, was my answer as good as this? Even if I got full marks, could have I improved on this?